Truth.
We do not rule out military action. That's what an ECOWAS spokesperson said in Abuja. The message? Clear. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger had gone too far. Their new alliance, AES, wasn't just a breakaway, it was now being treated as a threat to regional peace. But while international media warned of a war path, something else was happening on the ground. There were no riots, no mobs in the streets. Instead, in village homes and city blocks, people quietly hung AES flags from windows and doorposts. Not for war, but for something more powerful, a choice. And then came the twist: no fiery speeches, no defiant headlines, just silence, strategic, deliberate silence. AES didn't shout back. They reorganized their armies, launched joint patrols, and sent one quiet message: we won't attack, but we won't bow. So the question isn't just what happens next. It's what this moment really means. If your country had just reclaimed control and someone told you to give it back, what would you do? Stick with us. Because this isn't just about West Africa. It's about who gets to decide the future and who's finally refusing to ask permission. At the center of it all is a name you've probably heard before: Captain Ibrahim Traoré, once a soldier, now one of 3 young leaders facing down a system that's ruled for decades. And this time, he's not just fighting for his country. He's fighting to redefine what sovereignty actually looks like. In January 2024, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger made it official. They withdrew from ECOWAS, the West African regional bloc that had helped shape the political landscape for nearly 50 years. And they didn't just leave quietly. They formed a new alliance, AES, the Alliance of Sahel States. No ties to France, no oversight from the EU, no approval from anyone but themselves. It wasn't just an exit. It was a line in the sand. On paper, AES was created to fight terrorism together. But in reality, it became something else, a statement that the old model of externally guided democracy, of foreign military support, of economic dependency wasn't working anymore. But this didn't come out of nowhere. People in these countries had lived through years of coups, instability, and promises that didn't deliver. Aid flowed in, but schools stayed broken. Foreign troops patrolled streets, but kidnappings didn't stop. Democracy existed, but only on paper. So when their leaders pulled out, most people didn't panic, they nodded. A market seller in Ouagadougou said, "We've tried the old way, nothing changed. Maybe this new way will cost more, but at least it's ours." In the capitals, the signs were immediate. Flags came down, borders closed. French military agreements dissolved overnight. There was no roadmap. But for the first time in decades, these nations were standing without someone holding the pen for them. And while some called it reckless, others saw something else: a pivot. Not to chaos, but to ownership. Because when you've spent years living under a system that isn't built for you, stepping away isn't just political, it's personal. But if you walk out of the room, the real question is, how will the others respond? Just days after AES was announced, ECOWAS called an emergency meeting in Abuja. No delay, no diplomacy. They issued a formal demand: return to the ECOWAS framework or face consequences. The wording sounded procedural. But the undertone was unmistakable: we're not asking. Behind the scenes, member states scrambled. Nigeria, the region's biggest player, pushed hard for a unified crackdown, fearing a domino effect. If these 3 get away with it, one senior advisor warned, every fragile democracy in West Africa could fall next. France, already sidelined by AES, lobbied harder. A leaked memo revealed officials offering logistical support if a military response became necessary. But not everyone agreed. Ghana and Senegal broke ranks, warning that military intervention would punish the people, not the leaders. You can't bomb sovereignty, one delegate said, and call it peace. And outside the halls of power, the tension was real. In Lagos, cafe owners argued over the move. In Accra, university students protested, not in support of AES, but in fear of war. A small survey in Nigeria showed 43% of respondents didn't support intervention, even as their government threatened it. One woman in Côte d'Ivoire said, "I'm not sure who's right, but if these young leaders can give their people land, power, and safety, why are we afraid of that?" The pressure was building, but it wasn't just political, it was emotional. Because for the first time in years, the moral high ground was shifting. ECOWAS had once been seen as the peacekeeper. Now people were starting to ask, is it still about peace, or just about control? And if you've been following this far, these are the questions worth sitting with. Like this video if you're seeing things differently. Because sometimes the line between law and power isn't where you thought it was. While ECOWAS was preparing pressure, AES was preparing something else. On June 15th, all three countries issued the same order: reorganize the army, send elite battalions to the Sahel Triangle, launch the first joint military exercise, codename Sahel Shield. It wasn't a parade, it wasn't for cameras, it was quiet, efficient, and fully coordinated. And the message was simple: we are not provoking war. But we will not be caught unprepared. Traoré arrived in uniform, no stage, no teleprompter, no bodyguards. He shook hands with soldiers one by one, and then someone asked if he was afraid. He answered, "For the first time in our history, we stand on this land without anyone directing us. Why would I fear that?" At the same time, local governments were instructed to set up early warning systems near the borders with Nigeria and Benin. They didn't announce it, but people understood. They were preparing for every possibility, even the worst. But here's what surprised people most: there was no panic, no forced enlistment, no calls for revenge. Instead, what followed was something subtle and far more powerful. A national media campaign called Security Self-Reliance began airing in all three countries. It wasn't propaganda, it was education. Radio hosts talked about food security. TV anchors explained border policy. Teachers taught students how sovereignty connects to safety. A mother in Mali said, "I don't know politics, but I understand when someone finally explains it to me, like I'm not just a voter, but part of this." Before, defense had always come from the outside. Now it was coming from the inside. And that shift, it didn't just change who carried the gun. It changed who believed they had something worth protecting. When military action didn't happen, economic pressure took its place. On July 2nd, ECOWAS announced a partial trade embargo against AES. Bank transfers were frozen. Border checks tightened. Fuel, medicine, and agricultural shipments stalled at checkpoints. And just like that, the front line shifted from soldiers to supply chains. The official line was clear: these are preventive measures to restore democracy. But in reality, the first ones affected weren't politicians. They were farmers, shopkeepers, and school teachers. In rural Niger, a mother named Ada told a reporter, "I used to walk to Nigeria to buy salt and soap. Now I pay triple, and I'm not sure if I'll even find it." Meanwhile, international lenders followed suit. The IMF and World Bank paused all development projects: water systems, schools, food security programs, all frozen until stability improves. AES didn't deny the strain. They acknowledged it publicly and called for calm. But the numbers didn't lie. Food prices spiked, fuel shortages hit hard, and yet the streets stayed quiet. No riots. No chance to bring back the old system. A journalist from Dakar wrote, "What's unsettling isn't the hardship, it's the patience. People seem willing to endure pain if it means owning the outcome." That was the gamble. Would the people turn on their leaders under pressure, or turn inward and hold the line, because sanctions are rarely about destroying governments. They're about breaking belief. But this time, belief wasn't coming from politics. It was coming from everyday people who decided that hard times with dignity were better than comfort with conditions. When sanctions didn't break the alliance, the strategy shifted. Not pressure from the outside, but doubt from the inside. Anonymous articles started circulating, claims that Mali resented Traore's influence, that Niger felt excluded from key decisions. None of it confirmed, all of it shared widely. Then came the money. Independent journalists in Lagos and Paris traced quiet funding lines, backdoor support for old political players, small protest groups, media outlets with a single message. Bring back democracy now. AES didn't take the bait. They didn't ban protests. They didn't block dissenting voices. Instead, they opened town halls. Local administrators invited the public to ask questions on autonomy, the economy, security. And people showed up, not in protest, in curiosity. In Ouagadougou, a baker stood up and asked, "If you say this is about sovereignty, show us how that puts bread in our ovens, not just ideas, results." It wasn't a challenge. It was a demand for clarity. And that demand, open, direct, unfiltered, was exactly what made the difference. No force, no crackdown, just transparency, and with it, a strange shift. Because while ECOWAS tried to shape perception, other countries started watching. Gabon, Chad, Congo governments that had long kept quiet began making statements. Not loud but clear, every nation has the right to choose its path. And suddenly, AES wasn't isolated anymore. It was becoming an example. Makes you wonder, doesn't it, what happens when the underdogs stop asking for permission? If this story is making you rethink what power looks like, give it a share. Sometimes all it takes is one quiet no to start a new conversation. As whispers of doubt swirled around AES, something unexpected happened. A message aired, not a speech, not a threat, just images. A Nigerian mother teaching her son to read the alphabet on the dirt floor. A Malian teacher standing in a half-destroyed classroom. A young Burkina Faso soldier kneeling in prayer before patrol. No voiceover, no music, no agenda, just a caption, "We are not bowing." Within hours, the footage went viral across the continent. In Congo, artists reposted it. In Angola, academics wrote open letters of support. In Senegal, students marched with 3 fingers raised for Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. The twist, there was no official campaign, no government press team, no hashtag strategy. It spread on its own because it wasn't selling anything. It was just real, and the world noticed. Even ECOWAS paused, no new statements. No emergency votes. Because when a movement moves without noise, it becomes harder to control. Inside AES, something shifted too. People stopped waiting for orders. They started organizing cleanups. Kids painted murals of unity. Local radios opened phone lines for people to speak their minds. A primary school teacher in Kaya said, "I've never had electricity in my classroom. But for once, I have something to tell my students that's not just survival." That's the thing about resistance. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's a mother refusing to flee. Sometimes it's a soldier refusing to hate. And when silence becomes a message, you realize power doesn't just come from weapons. It comes from what people choose to carry when everything else has been taken. As the AES bloc held its ground, another shift was happening, this time far from the Sahel. In Libreville, Gabon, a quiet but powerful declaration was made at a regional conference. No one said the words, "We support AES." They didn't have to. The presidents of Gabon, Chad, Congo, Central African Republic, Equatorial Guinea issued a joint statement. Every African nation has the right to choose its development path without permission. No press frenzy. No military alliance. Just a line in the sand drawn without raising a fist. Days later, AES leaders were invited to a closed-door meeting in Bangui. At the table, Leaders who had held their countries together through insurgencies, sanctions, and isolation. On the agenda, trade, security, energy, and a new idea, a platform for African self-reliance. Outside of ECOWAS. Outside of CAN, not rebellion. Redesign. At the same time, diplomats from Russia, Turkey, even Brazil reopened discreet channels, no public fanfare but unmistakable interest. Solar energy, mineral access, infrastructure. AES was no longer a cornered bloc. It was becoming a pivot point. And maybe that's what worried the old system most. That three poor countries, long dismissed as unstable, could turn crisis into coordination, not by fighting harder, but by staying standing. A Burkina Faso student, when asked what had changed, said, "For once, we're not explaining ourselves to anyone. We're just living how we want and letting the world decide how to react." Well, it's strange how fast perception can flip. One year you're a failed state. The next, you're a mirror, reflecting the fragility of those who thought they were untouchable. And if the world is watching, maybe the next big shift won't come from a capital. Maybe it'll come from a village, a classroom, a prayer, because power can redraw borders, but belief redraws history. In the end, what started as three countries breaking away from a system has become something much bigger. It's no longer just about military alliances or political friction. It's about who gets to write the story of Africa from the inside. In my opinion, this isn't just geopolitical news. It's a shift in identity. I think when people choose to walk through fire for the right to decide their own future, that says more than any headline ever could. Because it's easy to talk about democracy, harder to live through the consequences of chasing it on your own terms. And I guess what moved me most wasn't the bold moves or the declarations. It was the quiet moments, a mother teaching, a teacher staying, a people enduring not because they were told to, but because they chose to. If that moved you too, let us know in the comments. Like the video, subscribe for more, and share this if you think these stories deserve to be heard. And hey, make sure to catch our next episode. We're diving into something you won't want to miss. See you soon.